Hey, what's up guys? Brian Kelly here from Zombie Guitar. Today in this video we are going to be looking at 6 different types of minor scales to play over the same chord progression. So you always have to first look at the chords that you're soloing over and then say, okay, this is what's going on in the rhythm section. This is what I could potentially do in my lead playing. So the chord progression that we're soloing over is in the key of A minor, but there's going to be 2 out-of-key chords. So if everything was 100% in the key of A minor with no out-of-key chords at all, I would most likely probably just stick to my A minor pentatonic scale and the A natural minor scale. But because there's some out-of-key chords thrown into the mix, I'm using some other scales that kind of highlight those other out-of-key chords. So let me first just give you the demo, which shows all 6 scales played back-to-back over the simple 4-chord progression, and then I'll walk you through the theory. So as you can see in those demos, the notes were labeled by their interval names as opposed to their actual note names. So rather than calling them A, B, C, F sharp, stuff like that, they were instead called root, flat third, fifth, flat 7, stuff like that. And that's really the main point that I'm trying to get across in this lesson. If you can think of your scale in terms of intervals, and you don't always have to be right here in pentatonic position number 1. I was just using pentatonic position number 1 because everyone knows that one. That's your first scale you usually learn on the guitar. So I was just using a familiar scale, showing you that particular scale in interval form, and then showing you how you can make these slight manipulations to a familiar scale to create these other types of scales. So you can always consider your major scale to be the baseline from which to derive any other scale or any other chord. And you do so by applying the scale formula, or the chord formula. So the major scale formula is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That's why it's considered the baseline from which to derive everything else. So if we're trying to derive, A minor, A natural minor, A harmonic minor, A melodic minor, everything has the root A to it, that means everything's being derived from the A major scale. So let's look at our A major scale as our starting point, and then we'll come up with all these other scales. So your A major scale looks like this. Applying a number to each one of those, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So the most closely related scale to the A major scale, or the most closely related scale to the major scale of the 6 that we're using in this lesson, would be your melodic minor scale. Melodic minor scale has the scale formula 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So basically you just take the scale, you take the third note of the scale, you lower it by 1/2 step. The result is your A melodic minor scale. So here's your A melodic minor. So now we can turn this scale into the A harmonic minor scale. The scale formula for that is 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, 7. So the difference is now you take your 6th note and then you lower it by 1/2 step. So here's your A harmonic minor. In order to make this into the natural minor scale, we would lower that 7th. So the natural minor scale formula is 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7. Dorian is 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. So here's Dorian. So let's go back to natural minor again. And then from natural minor, your minor pentatonic scale just eliminates the 2nd and the 6th note, or the 2 and the flat 6, whatever you want to call it. It's just 5 notes. 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. Back at 1. And then you have your blues scale. Your blues scale just adds in the flat 5. So we just did all those alterations to the major scale right here in one single octave, but this applies to all 6 strings. This applies to every single pentatonic position. This applies to the entire neck of the guitar. That's why it's a good idea to know your intervals. So when you're playing a scale pattern, be aware of where the 3rd is. Be aware of where the root is, because you know that wherever you have a 3rd, your flat 3rd is 1/2 step below it. Wherever you have your root, your flat 7th is 1 whole step lower than the root. Things like that. So if you're not 100% comfortable with a specific scale, but you are comfortable with a different scale that's closely related, you can kind of be like, oh, okay, that's the one note I have to change in order to result in this new scale. So intervals, 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 it's going to help you a lot. So back to this one position right here. So even though the major scale is typically like the baseline from which all other scales are derived from a music theory standpoint, from a guitar player perspective, we tend to kind of just use our minor pentatonic scale as the baseline. So you have root, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. Back at 1, root, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, 1. Alright, so you can add in your blue note, add in your flat 5. So your flat 5 is always going to be 1/2 step lower than the 5, 1/2 step higher than the 4. So your blue note can always be found as long as you know where your 4 or 5 are. Going back to the minor pentatonic scale, adding in your 2 additional notes to create your A natural minor scale. You add in your 2 and your flat 6. That's your natural minor scale. Raise the 7th of your natural minor scale. You have your harmonic minor scale. Where you have your root, you have that 7 1/2 step below it, so you can throw in your 7 there too. So then you have your melodic minor scale, which is a 1 note difference from the harmonic minor scale. So melodic minor scale has a natural 6. So here's your melodic minor. So then finally we have the Dorian scale. So the Dorian scale is only 1 note difference from the melodic minor scale. It has a flat 7 instead of a natural 7. So your Dorian scale is this. So how do you know exactly which notes to change? How do you know which intervals to manipulate in order to fit the chords that you're soloing over? Well, the first step is to always look at the chord progression. Look at your chord progression, figure out what's going on, and then that is going to give you basically just some ideas of what you could potentially do over each specific chord. If all the chords were 100% part of the key of A minor, if there was no out-of-key chords being used, I would most likely probably just play my A minor pentatonic scale and my A natural minor scale. I wouldn't be using these other scales. But because there's some out-of-key chords being used, then I'm throwing in some other scales to kind of highlight those out-of-key chords. So let's look at the chord progression, and then we'll figure out what exactly to do over each one. So the chord progression I was soloing over was an A minor 7, followed by G dominant 7, followed by an E dominant 7, followed by a D dominant 7. I was playing it up here in this area, so the A minor 7 was like this. G dominant 7 was like this. E dominant 7 was like this. D dominant 7 was like this. So you could play those same exact chords in the open position if you want. A minor 7, G dominant 7, E dominant 7, D dominant 7. You could also reduce these chords to their triad form just to see which chords are major and which chords are minor. So in triad form, you have an A minor, G major, E major, D major. So that's the chord progression that we're soloing over. So this is in the key of A minor. As I said, some out-of-key chords are being used, but we're still calling this the key of A minor. Your A minor chord is your tonal center. The whole progression is just kind of centered around that A minor sound. So we can safely say that this is an A minor chord progression with some out-of-key chords being used. So how do you know which chords are out of key? Well, let's first look at this key signature from the major perspective. So A minor and C major, that's your same key signature. It's a relative major-minor pair. So if you're looking at this from the major perspective, your 1 chord is C major, 2 chord is D minor, 3 chord is E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished. Looking at all these chords in their 7th form, anytime you look at a key signature from a major perspective in their 7th form, your 1 and 4 chords are always going to become major 7th chords. Your 2, 3, and 6 chords always become minor 7th chords. And then your 5 chord becomes a dominant 7th chord. And then your 7 chord becomes a half diminished chord. So that's true for any key signature. And all the 12 key signatures, you're always going to have that. So that's the major perspective numbering. But for the purpose of this lesson, since we're looking at 6 different minor scales, we're using some out-of-key chords, everything's minor, 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 it makes more sense to rearrange the chord numbering based on the minor perspective. So I'm going to call the A minor chord the 1 chord, and then everything else is going to be adjusted accordingly. So A minor becomes your 1, B diminished is 2, C major is 3, D minor is 4, E minor is 5, F major is 6, G major is 7. So one thing that you're going to encounter when you're browsing the internet and you're looking at chord progressions based on minor numbering, you're going to see it 2 different ways. Sometimes you'll see it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, with A minor being your 1 chord, and all the numbers adjusted accordingly. Sometimes you'll see it 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7. The reason they do it that way sometimes is because that's based off of the scale formula for a natural minor key. So the natural minor scale formula is 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7. So sometimes you'll see a chord progression where A minor will be your 1 chord, C major will be called your flat 3 chord, G major will be called your flat 7 chord. Sometimes you'll see it, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So A minor will be your 1 chord, C major will be your 3 chord, G major will be your 7 chord. So if things aren't already confusing enough for you, that's just another thing to keep in mind. Sometimes you're going to see chords numbered like that. Sometimes you'll see them numbered like that. That's why, if at all possible, I like to just keep things major numbering. But for this lesson, we can't always do that. So just something to keep in mind. So hopefully that's not too confusing. But anyway, so the chords in question here, the chords that are being made into out-of-key chords are going to be the 4 and the 5 chord. So the in-key chords, the 4 and 5, a D minor and an E minor. Looking at those chords in their 7th form, it would be a D minor 7 and an E minor 7. But in this particular example, this lesson, we're making this into a D dominant 7 and an E dominant 7. Looking at those chords in just their triad form, it's a D major and an E major. So the A minor chord, or in its seventh form, which is an A minor 7, that's in the key. The G major chord, or in its seventh form is a G dominant 7, that's in the key. But then you have these other two chords that are out of the key. So because you have out of key chords, that's where these other scales are coming from. That's why I'm choosing to use other scales. Again, if I was 100% in this key, I would probably just stick with my A minor pentatonic and A natural minor scale. So the more that you experiment with soloing over various different chord progressions in which a few out-of-key chords are being used, or even just one out-of-key chord, the more that you start doing that, the more you start to become familiar with what exactly to do in those types of scenarios. So if you're soloing in a minor key and you see, okay, a major 5 chord is being used instead of the in-key minor 5. Instead of being in minor 5, it's a major 5. That triggers, okay, I can do this. Or if you're in a minor key and there's supposed to be a minor 4 chord, but instead a major 4 chord is being used, you think, okay, I do this when I see a major 4 chord. So when you see these specific out-of-key chords being used, those are your triggers, okay? Do this when I see that. Do this when I see that. So in this lesson here, we're using a major 4 and a major 5 chord. It's supposed to be a minor 4 and a minor 5 if everything was part of the same key, but we're using a major 4 and a major 5 instead. So what's the difference between minor and major? Well, minor chord has a root, a flat third, and a fifth, and then a major chord has a root, a third, and a fifth. So the difference between a major chord and a minor chord is just one single note. Even if you look at these chords in their seventh form, a minor 7th chord versus a dominant 7th chord, they still only differ by one single note. So that one single note is what's resulting in it being an out-of-key chord. So let's see what that single note is and then compare that to our starting scale. So our starting scale, A minor, if everything was 100% in the key of A minor, then that would be our scale to use the entire time. So A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. So when we throw in this major 4 chord instead of a minor 4 chord, the 4 chord in this example is a D minor. When we make that into a D major, we're now introducing an F sharp into the picture. So that F sharp, that's that one single out of key note. That F sharp happens to be the A, B, C, D, E, F. So that's the 6th note of the A natural minor scale. That's going to be the note that we alter. So we're going to look for scales that have that particular note in it. Same thing with the 5 chord. When you make the minor 5 chord into a major 5 chord, it differs by only one single note. So the in-key 5 chord, the minor 5 chord, part of the key of A minor should be E minor. But we're making it into an E major. So instead of E, G, and B, it's E, G sharp, and B. So you look at that G sharp, you say, okay, that G sharp is the out-of-key note. Let's compare that to our key scale, A natural minor scale. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, becoming a G sharp. So that G sharp is the 7th note. So you have these alterations to the scale. If everything was 100% in the key of A minor, there was no out-of-key chords being used. Me personally, I would just use the A minor pentatonic scale and the A natural minor scale. I would also use the A blues scale. I wouldn't hang on the blue note too much. I just use the blue note as a passing tone. Those are like my 3 go-to scales all the time, if everything's 100% in the same key. But you have these other scales, and they're great to use for out-of-key instances. So when the minor 5 chord is made into a major 5 chord, we had already determined that affects the 7th note of your overall key scale. So minor 5 becomes major 5, 7th note of your key scale. What scales have an alteration to the 7th note? Harmonic minor, melodic minor. So you could potentially use those 2 scales in that instance over that chord. And then when you have a minor 4 chord and it's made into a major 4 chord, that affects the 6th note of your key scale. So your 6th note, what scales have an altered 6th note? Melodic minor, do ring. So again, Anytime I see that D major being used or D dominant 7 being used in the context of A minor, I think to myself, okay, over that one chord I could play a Dorian, or over that one chord I could play a melodic minor. So it's really up to you. It's you don't have to play the whole scale in its entirety. You just kind of want to focus on these intervals, because those intervals are being connected with the chord that's out of key. And the reason that connection is made is because the one note that's making the chord out of key is the one note that is the scale alteration. So if I'm A minor, A minor, A minor, blah, 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 noodling around in A minor all day long, a D major chord comes along, I say, okay, make sure to target that sixth, raise that sixth degree by 1/2 step. So I don't necessarily have to be thinking, have to play my full melodic minor scale, or have to play my full Dorian scale. I'm just thinking, okay, I'm in a minor key context, but just focus on that sixth note. Focus on making that F into an F sharp. That's what's giving me the flavor of that particular out of key chord. And then the same thing with your 5 chord. Minor 5 becomes a major 5. Why is minor 5 becoming a major 5? One single note difference. That one single note difference happens to be the 7th note of the key scale. So anytime there's a G being made into a G sharp, I think to myself, all right, harmonic minor in that specific instance. That's how I would approach this specific scenario. There's a million other possibilities out there, but hopefully this lesson just kind of gets you thinking in different kinds of ways on how to approach various chord progressions that use out-of-key chords. Hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. See you next time. Thanks for watching.